You are worth $1.2 million, and your mother still asks if you need gas money. Not because she doesn't believe you, because the number doesn't look like anything. It doesn't look like a car in the driveway or a house with columns out front. It looks like a Tuesday. It looks like you, 34 years old, sitting in a Honda Civic with 161,000 miles on it, parked outside a Sherwin-Williams in Terre Haute, Indiana, waiting for a paint order that's running 12 minutes late. This is the gap nobody prepares you for. The gap between what wealth is supposed to look like and what it actually is when you're the one holding it. Your family pictured a Rolex. What they got was a man who still clips coupons for motor oil and reads every insurance policy line by line before he signs it. You were the first person in your family to finish college. That was supposed to be the ceiling. Nobody had a script for what came after because nobody in your bloodline had gone after. It started with a duplex. Not a mansion, not a flip you saw on television, a beat-up duplex, 2 blocks from where you grew up, the kind of place with a sagging gutter and a landlord who'd clearly given up sometime around 2009. You were 26. You had $14,000 saved from 3 years of overtime at a distribution warehouse and a first-time buyer's loan that took 4 tries to get approved. The seller wanted $92,000. You paid $87,000 because you'd learned from your grandfather, who fixed washing machines for a living and never once raised his voice about money, that everything is negotiable if you're the only one willing to wait. You moved into one unit, rented the other for $650 a month. Your mortgage was $610. That $40 a month felt like nothing. It was, in fact, everything. The first proof that money could be built instead of earned, stacked instead of spent, made to work a shift you didn't have to show up for. Your father worked at the same tire plant for 31 years. He is proud of you in a way he doesn't have language for, because pride in your family was always measured in hours logged, not dollars accumulated. He still doesn't fully understand what you do. You've stopped trying to explain it at Thanksgiving. This is a story about the 6 years between that duplex and the account balance you have now. It is not a story about luck. It is a story about a series of small, unglamorous, repeatable decisions, the kind that don't photograph well, that nobody would put on a magazine cover, that add up quietly into something your family doesn't have a word for yet. The duplex taught you the math before it taught you anything else. $87,000 purchase, $650 monthly rent from one side while you lived rent-free in the other. 18 months in, you refinanced, pulled out $22,000 in equity the market had quietly handed you, and went looking for the next mundane thing nobody else wanted. You found it in a laundromat 2 miles from your apartment, the kind with buzzing fluorescent lights and a soda machine that hadn't worked since the Bush administration. The owner, a man named Ellis Kowalczyk, was 71 and tired. He'd bought it in 1988 and hadn't updated a machine since 2004. He wanted $58,000 for the whole operation, machines included. You offered $46,000. He took it in November, mostly, he said, because you were the only buyer who'd actually walked the floor before making an offer. Net income after utilities and the lease, $1,100 a month. Not glamorous, not even interesting really, just a number that showed up unasked every 30 days. You didn't stop there. 8 months later, a strip mall parking lot near the interstate went up for sale after the anchor tenant closed. 40 spaces, cracked asphalt, a fence that leaned like it was tired of standing. $31,000 to buy, a contract with a towing company and a weekend market for overflow parking, and suddenly you had another $800 a month landing in an account you'd started calling, privately, the quiet one. Then came the billboard, a single sign on a stretch of county highway outside town, leased from a farmer named Dolores Pruitt, who'd inherited the land and had no interest in the sign business. $19,000 to take over the lease and the structure, $475 a month paid by a regional dentist's office that renewed without you ever having to ask twice. 4 assets. 4 small, boring checks, none of them the kind of thing you'd mention at a party, all of them the kind of thing that, stacked together, quietly crossed $4,000 a month in income that required almost nothing from you once the paperwork was signed. Your brother asked you once what you actually did for money. You told him duplex, laundromat, parking lot, billboard. He laughed, thinking you were joking. You didn't correct him. Being underestimated, you were starting to learn, wasn't a cost, it was cover. By year 4, the pattern had a name, even if you never said it out loud. Find the asset nobody wants, priced by someone who's tired, and let time do the rest. You added a 5th piece, a coin-op car wash on the edge of town, 4 bays, 1 broken vacuum, purchased for $64,000 from a widow named Trish Alvarez who just wanted the calls to stop. Net after maintenance, $1,600 a month. By then the spreadsheet, an actual spreadsheet, nothing more sophisticated than that, showed $6,200 a month in income from 5 properties that combined most people would drive past without a second look. Around this time, you met Dorian Fetch at a Chamber of Commerce mixer you almost skipped. Dorian drove a leased Range Rover he mentioned twice in the first 4 minutes, wore a watch he called the Daytona like it was a nickname for a friend, and talked loudly about a real estate portfolio that turned out, on later inquiry, to 2 condos he was underwater on. Dorian asked what you drove. You told him a Civic. Dorian smiled the way people smile when they've already decided you're not worth further conversation. You let him. It was easier that way, and it left you alone to keep working while he kept performing. The harder part came from your cousin Nadia. She called in October, voice tight, explaining that her son needed a procedure insurance wouldn't fully cover, $18,000, maybe more. You had it. You could have wired it that night and never thought about it again. You didn't. Instead, you sat with her for 3 hours at her kitchen table, walked through every asset she actually had, a decent job, no savings, a maxed line of credit, and built her a plan instead, a payment structure with the hospital, a temporary second job you knew was hiring, a 6-month timeline that didn't require a rescue. It took longer, it cost you an uncomfortable phone call where she asked, flatly, why you wouldn't just help her. You told her the truth, the only way you knew how to say it. A check solves the month, it doesn't solve the pattern. Your grandfather never had money to give anyone, so he gave your father a method instead, and that method was the only inheritance that had ever actually worked. Handing Nadia $18,000 would have felt like love. It might have functioned like erosion. You've turned this over more nights than you've admitted to anyone, whether restraint in that kitchen was wisdom or just a story you told yourself so you could keep the number growing. The email arrived on a Tuesday in March from your accountant. Subject line, 2025 summary, please review. No fanfare, no subject line in all caps, just a PDF attachment and a 1-line message. Numbers look good. Call if you have questions. You opened it in the parking lot of the same Sherwin-Williams, the same Civic, engine still ticking as it cooled. Total assets across 5 properties, minus liabilities, minus the loan still outstanding on the duplex you refinanced twice, $1.2 million. You sat there for a while, not with the feeling you'd imagined at 26, hunched over a duplex listing on a laptop with a cracked corner. There was no music swelling, There was a paint order waiting inside with your name misspelled on the receipt, and a gas gauge sitting a quarter tank from empty, and the particular quiet of a Tuesday afternoon in a town where nobody driving past had any reason to know what had just been confirmed in your lap. You thought about Ellis Kowalczyk, who'd sold you a laundromat because you'd bothered to walk the floor, about Dolores Pruitt and her billboard, about Trish Alvarez and her 4 bays and 1 dead vacuum, about Dorian Fetch's Range Rover, probably still leased, still due at the end of the month whether the portfolio performed or not, about Nadia, who paid off the hospital in 7 months instead of 6, and who called in January just to say thank you, not for money, but for not giving her any. You thought about your mother, who still asks about gas money, and who you will probably never fully explain this to, because some inheritances aren't meant to be spoken, only demonstrated, one boring asset at a time. You drove home in the Civic. You will probably keep driving it for another 2 years, not as a statement, just as a habit that turned out to be worth more than anything Dorian ever leased. So the question isn't whether you could look richer, it's whether looking richer was ever the point.